The sound of dripping water echoed in the empty locker room. My heart raced faster than it ever had before, not from the workout, but from the silence that hung between us. I could feel the heat rise on my skin, even though the air was cold. He stood only a few steps away, his back turned, his shoulders broad and tense. I tried to look away, but my eyes betrayed me. Then it happened, his towel slipped, falling carelessly to the floor. In that moment, the world outside didn't exist. It was just the two of us, standing in a place that suddenly felt too small to contain everything building between us. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of something I had buried for so long. I knew this wasn't just another locker room story. This was the moment that would change everything. The locker room had always been a place I rushed through, a place filled with noise, laughter, and sometimes too much arrogance. But that night, it was different. The gym was already closing, and most of the guys had left. I lingered behind, pretending to tie my shoes slower than usual, my mind restless with thoughts I couldn't silence. The silence inside the room felt heavy, almost as if it was breathing with me. I could hear the faint hum of the air vent above and the sound of a single drop of water hitting the tiles. It was just him and me. We weren't strangers, not really. I knew his name, I knew his laugh, I had seen the way he played on the court with the kind of energy that made people stop and notice. But I had never really spoken to him beyond casual words, never dared to let my eyes linger too long. Yet here I was, with nothing but time and the four walls of the locker room holding us in place. My heart wouldn't slow down, no matter how hard I tried to keep it steady. I told myself to look away, to stay calm, but curiosity and something deeper, something I didn't want to name, kept pulling my eyes back to him. He stood at his locker, unbothered by my presence, peeling off his shirt, the fabric damp with sweat. The muscles in his back tensed and relaxed with every movement, a rhythm that somehow matched the pounding of my chest. I swallowed hard, hoping the sound wouldn't echo as loudly as it felt in my ears. There was an unspoken rule in places like this: you keep your eyes to yourself, you change quickly, you move on. But rules felt impossible to follow when the only other person in the room was him. I shifted on the bench, trying to give myself something to do, anything to disguise the storm running through my mind. My hands trembled slightly as I untied my shoelaces for the second time, pretending I had missed a knot. I could feel his presence in the corner of my eye, and every small movement he made seemed amplified by the silence. Then came the moment I didn't expect, the moment that still plays in my mind like a film on repeat. He pulled the towel from his bag, slung it casually around his waist, and without warning, it slipped. It hit the tiles with a soft sound that echoed louder than any word. For a second, time froze. My breath caught in my throat, my body locked between the urge to look and the desperate need to look away. I don't know if he noticed me stiffen, if he saw the way my face burned with a heat I couldn't hide. He didn't move quickly to grab it. He didn't rush to cover himself. Instead, he just stood there, almost as if he was daring the moment to stretch longer than it should. My chest rose and fell like I had just finished a marathon, but I hadn't moved an inch. All I could think was how exposed we both suddenly were, not just him, but me too. Because in that quiet, in that fragile space between a fallen towel and a racing heart, every truth I had hidden about myself pressed against my skin, begging to be seen. I finally forced myself to lower my gaze, focusing on the laces in my hand as if they could anchor me. But the image was already burned into me, not just his body, but the boldness of that silence, the vulnerability that came with it. Something shifted between us, even if no words had been spoken. And deep down, I knew the night would not let me leave the same way I had entered. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that it was nothing more than an accident, a simple slip of fabric that could happen to anyone. But the weight of the silence that followed told me otherwise. Every second stretched out, echoing in the hollow space of the locker room until it felt like the walls themselves were leaning in, pressing us closer together. I sat there frozen, my hands tangled in my shoelaces, pretending to concentrate though my fingers shook too much to finish the knot. He bent down slowly, reaching for the towel, and I could feel the air shift between us. My eyes betrayed me again, drawn toward him with a force I couldn't fight. It wasn't just about the moment, it was about everything I had buried deep inside myself, everything I had promised I would never let slip out. His body, his presence, his quiet confidence, it all exposed me in a way I hadn't prepared for. When he straightened, towel in hand, his eyes flickered toward me. It was just a glance, but it felt like he had seen through every layer I had built around myself. I looked away too quickly, cheeks burning, throat tight. My mind screamed at me to get up, to leave, to put an end to the unbearable stillness, but my legs refused to move. He walked past me toward the bench opposite mine, each step deliberate, unhurried, as though he knew I wouldn't dare to leave. I kept my gaze down, but I could feel his presence settle across from me. The room felt smaller, like the benches and lockers had closed in, trapping us together in this fragile, unspoken tension. My thoughts spun wildly, questions I didn't dare to voice, fears I couldn't face, desires I had no right to acknowledge. I told myself that he probably hadn't noticed, that I was safe behind the shield of my silence, but part of me knew that wasn't true. Something about the way he moved, the way he allowed the moment to linger, told me he wasn't blind to the energy that sparked in the space between us. I shifted on the bench, trying to steady my breath, trying to hold on to any scrap of composure. But then, in the quietest voice, he spoke. It wasn't much, just a simple, almost casual question about whether I'd finished my workout, but it hit me harder than any shout. My heart stumbled, my words tangled in my throat, and when I finally answered, my voice cracked just slightly. He didn't smile, he didn't laugh at my nerves. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if confirming something only he understood. That small gesture, that calm acknowledgement, broke something inside me. It wasn't just about him standing half-naked in front of me, it was about being seen in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be before. I felt stripped of every defense, every excuse, every careful wall I had built to hide the truth of who I was. For a moment, I hated him for it. I hated how easily he could unravel me without even trying. But at the same time, I couldn't look away. The silence stretched again after that brief exchange, but it no longer felt empty. It felt alive, humming with questions that neither of us dared to voice. I tried to convince myself that if I just stayed quiet, if I just finished tying my shoes and walked out, I could leave it all behind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. Something had already shifted. Something had already changed. My hands were still trembling when I finally stood, the weight of his gaze following me like a shadow. I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes, not yet. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and forced my legs to carry me toward the door. But even as I pushed it open, even as the cool air of the hallway hit my face, I knew the story wasn't over. The silence, the glance, the question, they would follow me long after I left that room. And part of me, no matter how much I tried to deny it, wanted to go back. The night after the locker room felt longer than any I could remember. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the darkness wrapping around me like a blanket I couldn't escape from. My mind replayed every detail with painful clarity, the sound of the towel falling, the weight of his glance, the calm way he spoke that simple question. I told myself to forget it, to push it aside like it was nothing more than a passing moment, but the truth wouldn't let go. It wasn't just what I had seen, it was how I had felt. Vulnerable. Exposed. Alive in a way that scared me. Every nerve in my body had woken up, and now I couldn't quiet them again. Sleep refused to come, and by morning, my chest ached with the exhaustion of battling thoughts I didn't dare share with anyone. At school the next day, everything felt louder, brighter, more chaotic than usual, as if the world had decided to remind me how small and insignificant I was. People laughed in the hallways, voices overlapping until I couldn't make sense of them, but none of it mattered because I was searching for one face. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I caught myself scanning the crowd, my stomach twisting every time I thought I saw him. When I finally did, across the cafeteria, my heart jolted so hard I nearly dropped my tray. He was sitting with his friends, laughing at something one of them had said, completely at ease in a world I felt I could never belong to. I froze for a second, debating whether to turn and run, but my legs betrayed me again and carried me closer, as if drawn by a string I couldn't cut. He noticed me before I could look away. His eyes lifted, steady and calm, and for the briefest moment, they met mine. The noise around us faded, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. Then he smiled. Not a wide grin, not something for the whole table to notice, just a small, knowing smile meant only for me. It was enough to send a wave of heat through me, enough to make my chest tighten with both fear and longing. I looked away quickly, fumbling to sit down at a table farther across the room, but the image of that smile wouldn't leave me. It clung to me for the rest of the day, making it impossible to focus on anything else. Later, in the gym, our paths crossed again. I had tried to avoid going at the same time, but fate or chance, or maybe something deeper, put us on the court together. He moved with an ease that drew everyone's attention, but it wasn't his skill that held me captive. It was the way his eyes would flick toward me in between plays, never lingering long enough for anyone else to notice, but just enough to remind me that whatever had passed between us wasn't forgotten. My chest felt heavy with questions I couldn't voice. Did he know what I felt? Did he mean to let the moment in the locker room linger, or had it all been in my imagination? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but beneath the fear was a spark I couldn't deny. When the game ended and the others drifted out, I found myself staying behind again, just like the night before. He stayed too, casually gathering his things, not in a rush. My hands grew clammy, my throat dry, as if my body already knew what was coming. He walked past me, close enough that I could feel the brush of air between us, and he paused. "You left quick yesterday," he said softly, his voice low enough that no one else could have heard. The words hit me like a strike to the chest. He remembered. He had noticed. My mind scrambled for a reply, but all I could manage was a weak shrug, as though that could explain the storm inside me. He studied me for a moment, not with judgment, not with mockery, but with something I couldn't quite name. Something patient. Something that made me feel both terrified and safe at the same time. Then, without waiting for me to answer, he moved toward the door, leaving me standing in the middle of the gym, breathless and shaken. That night, lying in bed again, I realized something had shifted inside me. He wasn't just a passing crush or a fleeting thought. He had seen me, really seen me, in a way no one else had before. And the more I tried to resist, the deeper it pulled me in. I knew I couldn't run from it forever. The following days passed in a blur of nerves and restless energy, each hour stretching long and slow because I couldn't shake the thought of him. Everything I did, every place I went, seemed tied to the memory of his voice and that quiet look he gave me in the gym. I found myself avoiding certain hallways, skipping lunches in the cafeteria, convincing myself that distance was the safest choice. Yet at the same time, I was restless when I didn't see him. It was like living with a constant ache, the pull between wanting to disappear and wanting to be noticed. My friends noticed I was distracted, but I brushed them off with excuses about homework or not sleeping well. The truth was harder to admit, that a single person had taken root in my mind and nothing felt the same anymore. One afternoon after practice, I lingered again, telling myself I needed more time to stretch when really I was waiting, half hoping he would still be around. The locker room was mostly empty, the last voices fading down the hallway, and I thought maybe he had already left. Relief mixed with disappointment in my chest, and I bent to tie my shoes. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, drawing closer until they stopped just a few feet away. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. My pulse jumped immediately, and my hands fumbled with the laces. "You always stay late," he said, his voice casual but carrying a weight that settled in the air between us. I finally forced myself to look up. He was leaning against the lockers, towel slung over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. My mouth felt dry, but I managed to nod. "Yeah, just finishing up," I muttered, the words tumbling out too fast. He didn't move right away, just watched me with a calm patience that both unnerved and intrigued me. Then he smiled, not in the playful way I had seen him smile with others, but softer, quieter, like he was offering me something no one else could see. My chest tightened, and I quickly dropped my gaze again, staring at the floor as if it could anchor me. "You left quick that night," he said suddenly, his voice lower now. The mention of it hit me like a spark, and I froze. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to pretend it hadn't meant anything, but my body betrayed me. My shoulders stiffened, and the silence I left in place said more than words ever could. He stepped closer, and I could feel the shift in the air. "Did I scare you?" he asked softly. The question lingered in the space between us, tender but also piercing. I forced myself to meet his eyes, and in that moment I saw something I hadn't expected. He wasn't mocking me, he wasn't testing me. There was genuine curiosity there, maybe even concern. My chest ached with the weight of everything I wanted to say, the truth clawing at the walls I had built around myself. "No," I whispered, though my voice cracked with the effort. "You didn't scare me." Something flickered in his expression then, a hint of relief mixed with something else I couldn't quite name. He nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for that answer, and then sat down on the bench across from me. For a moment neither of us spoke, the silence humming with words unspoken. I stared at my hands, twisting the fabric of my gym shorts, while my heart thudded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I noticed you look at me," he said, his tone steady, not accusing, not cruel, just honest. My breath caught, panic surging through me. The secret I had worked so hard to keep hidden had been pulled into the open with a single sentence. My first instinct was to deny it, to shake my head and laugh it off, but the way he looked at me made it impossible. He wasn't judging me, he was giving me space to admit the truth. I couldn't find the words. My throat tightened, my vision blurred slightly with the sting of unshed tears I refused to let fall. I wanted to speak, to tell him what it meant, how hard it had been to carry it all alone, but fear held me back. Instead, I sat in silence, hoping he could hear the confession in the way I couldn't meet his eyes. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He just nodded again, as if he understood everything I couldn't say. Then, after a long pause, he stood and slung his bag over his shoulder. "See you tomorrow," he said quietly, his voice gentle in a way that made my chest ache even more. When he left, I sat frozen on the bench, staring at the empty doorway. For the first time in my life, I felt seen and completely terrified at the same time. My secret wasn't mine anymore, not entirely. And even though fear still clung to me, beneath it was something else, something I hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. The next day carried a heaviness that I couldn't shake, like every step I took was weighed down by the memory of what he had said to me. "I noticed you look at me." Those words had carved themselves into my mind, replaying again and again until they drowned out everything else. It should have scared me more than it did. I should have felt ashamed, embarrassed, exposed in a way that made me want to disappear. But instead, there was this strange warmth deep in my chest, a quiet fire that refused to burn out. I couldn't stop thinking about the way his voice had sounded, steady, calm, without a trace of cruelty. It was as if he had been offering me a truth instead of taking one from me. And that changed everything. All through class, my mind wandered. I caught myself staring out the window, my pen still, the notes on my paper nothing more than scribbles. Every sound around me felt muted, every face blurred into the background, except when I thought of his. His smile, that look in his eyes that seemed to read me without judgment, kept creeping back into my thoughts until I could hardly breathe. I told myself to focus, to be normal, but the more I tried, the harder it became. Normal had slipped away from me the second he looked at me like he knew. By the time practice ended that afternoon, I felt both restless and exhausted. Part of me wanted to escape before he had the chance to approach me again, to run from the tension building between us. But another part, louder, braver, maybe reckless, wanted to see him, wanted to hear his voice again and feel the strange comfort hidden in it. So I stayed. I lingered in the locker room, pretending to dig through my bag while the others left, my heart pounding in anticipation. I tried to deny. When the door finally closed behind the last teammate, silence filled the space, and I knew I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, and there he was, leaning casually against the lockers as though he had been waiting for me. My chest tightened instantly. He didn't speak right away. He just watched me, his expression calm but unreadable, his presence filling the room in a way that made the air feel heavy. I wanted to look away, but his gaze held me still. "You didn't deny it," he said at last, his voice low, steady, carrying a weight that made my stomach twist. I swallowed hard, words tangled in my throat. "What's the point?" I muttered softly, my eyes dropping to the floor. "You already know." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then I heard the sound of his footsteps, slow and deliberate, until he stopped just a breath away from me. The closeness made my pulse race so hard I thought I might collapse. I forced myself to glance up, and when I did, I found his eyes fixed on mine, not sharp, not cruel, but steady and unflinching. "You don't have to hide with me," he said, almost in a whisper. The words hit me deeper than I expected. They weren't dramatic or loud, but they carried a kind of gentleness I wasn't used to. I felt my throat tighten, my vision blur again with tears I fought to keep inside. I wanted to believe him, to let those words sink into the parts of me that had been aching in silence for so long. But fear still clung to me, whispering all the ways this could end badly. "I'm not. I don't." I tried to form an excuse, a shield, but the words crumbled before they could leave my mouth. Because the truth was, I did want to be seen. I did want to stop hiding. And here he was, offering me that chance. He reached out then, not to touch me, but just enough that I could see his hand linger in the air, an unspoken gesture of patience. "It's okay," he said simply. "You don't have to say it. I just wanted you to know." Something inside me cracked at that moment, a wall I had held up for so long finally giving way. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and nodded, the smallest gesture but one that carried everything I couldn't voice. His lips curved into the faintest smile, and the weight on my chest lightened just enough for me to breathe. We stood there in silence, but it wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. It was warm, steady, almost safe. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the burden of myself alone. That night, lying in bed, I didn't feel the same restless panic that had haunted me before. Instead, there was a quiet hum beneath my ribs, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as I had always believed. Maybe I had found someone who saw me for who I was and didn't turn away. And that thought was enough to keep me awake, not with fear this time, but with something far more dangerous, possibility. The days that followed felt like walking through a world that had shifted on its axis. Everything looked the same on the surface, the classrooms, the crowded hallways, the noise of the cafeteria, but inside me, nothing was the same anymore. His words echoed in the back of my mind every time I caught sight of him. "You don't have to hide with me." They were simple, almost ordinary words, but to me, they felt like a key turning inside a locked door. I carried them with me like a secret, not the kind that weighs you down, but the kind that makes you want to protect it at all costs. I found myself stealing glances at him more often, not out of fear like before, but out of something gentler, something that was slowly growing into comfort. And every time our eyes met, it was like we were sharing a conversation no one else could hear. One afternoon, the rain was falling hard outside, drumming against the gym windows in steady sheets. Practice ended early because the coach didn't want anyone slipping on the wet floors. The others rushed out, laughing and shoving each other as they ran into the storm, but I stayed behind, claiming I needed to grab something from my locker. I wasn't surprised when I realized he had stayed too. It had become a pattern, the way we found ourselves in the same empty spaces when everyone else was gone. I opened my locker slowly, pretending to search for something, my pulse quickening when I heard his footsteps behind me. "You always wait," he said softly, his voice carrying easily in the quiet room. I turned to face him, and there it was again, that look, steady and patient, the kind that seemed to strip away every excuse I tried to cling to. I tried to shrug it off, to play it cool, but the truth was written all over me. My silence told him more than my words ever could. He stepped closer, not invading, but enough that the air between us thickened with everything unspoken. "Why?" he asked gently. It was such a simple question, but it hit me harder than I expected. Why did I stay? Why did I keep waiting when I could have left with everyone else? The truth tangled in my throat, and for a moment, I thought I wouldn't be able to say it. But something about the rain outside, the way it drowned out the world beyond those walls, made me braver than I had ever been. "Because you're here," I whispered, the words barely audible but heavy with everything I had been holding back. His eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen before, and for a moment, I thought I saw relief flicker across his face, as if he had been waiting to hear me say it. He didn't laugh, he didn't make me regret it. Instead, he just nodded slowly, like he understood the weight of what it cost me to admit even that much. We sat down on the bench, side by side, the rain a steady rhythm against the windows. I could feel the warmth of him beside me, and it was enough to make every nerve in my body spark. I wanted to say more, to tell him how long I had carried this secret, how many nights I had spent lying awake wishing I could be brave. But the words stayed lodged in my chest. Still, it didn't feel like silence this time. It felt like he already knew, like I didn't need to explain myself to him. After a while, he spoke again, his voice low, thoughtful. "You don't have to rush. I'm not going anywhere." Those words landed deeper than he could have imagined. All my life, I had felt like people drifted away the moment they saw too much of me, as if I was something to hide, something inconvenient. But here he was, offering patience instead of pressure, presence instead of distance. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he meant it, but trust had never come easy for me. Still, the way he looked at me, calm, unwavering, made it hard not to. We stayed like that for a long time, saying little, just sharing the quiet. The storm outside raged on, but inside, there was a calm I had never known before. For once, I didn't feel like I had to hide the way my hands shook or the way my chest rose and fell too quickly. He noticed, of course he noticed, but instead of pulling away, he let the silence cradle us. When the rain finally began to ease, we both stood, almost at the same time. He glanced at me, a faint smile playing on his lips, and said, "See you tomorrow." The way he said it wasn't casual. It was a promise. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the last drops of rain tapping against the window, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. I wasn't free yet, not from the fear, not from the doubts, but I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward becoming the version of myself I had always been too afraid to be. The following week unfolded like a quiet storm inside me. Each day seemed ordinary on the surface, classes, practices, laughter in the hallways, but underneath, everything felt charged with something I couldn't quite name. I moved through the days carrying a weight that was no longer only fear but also something gentler, something that felt dangerously close to longing. Every time I saw him across the room, Every time our eyes met for even the briefest second, it was like the air shifted and I couldn't breathe the same way again. I tried to hide it, to bury it beneath casual conversations and forced smiles, but my heart betrayed me. It beat too fast when he was near, too heavy when he wasn't. One evening after practice, the locker room emptied out quicker than usual. The noise of teammates faded down the hallway until only the two of us were left behind, as though the universe had carved out that space for us and no one else. I sat on the bench, pretending to scroll through my phone, while my chest pounded like I was waiting for something I didn't know how to ask for. He walked slowly toward his locker, setting down his bag with an ease that contrasted with the storm brewing inside me. I watched him from the corner of my eye, and when he finally turned toward me, our gazes locked with a force that made it impossible to look away. "You've been different," he said softly, his voice filling the silence without breaking it. The words struck me hard. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I already knew. He had seen me pull away from the group more often, seen me linger in places just to be near him, seen the way my guard was starting to slip no matter how tightly I tried to hold it. My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't answer. Then, with more courage than I thought I had, I whispered, "I don't know how to be around you." His eyes softened, and he stepped closer, each stride steady, deliberate, until he stood in front of me. The distance between us was barely a breath now, and I could feel the warmth radiating from him. My hands trembled in my lap, and I clasped them together, hoping he wouldn't notice, though I knew he already had. "You don't have to figure it out all at once," he said, his tone gentle, like he was offering me a way to breathe again. "Just be here." Something about those words broke through me. I had spent so long running from myself, hiding from the truth of what I felt, terrified of being exposed. And here he was, telling me it was enough to just exist in the moment. I felt my eyes sting with tears, and I turned away quickly, ashamed of how fragile I felt. But then I felt his hand, warm and steady, resting lightly on my shoulder. It wasn't forceful or demanding, it was patient, grounding, like he was telling me without words that I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, I let myself lean into the moment. I didn't speak, didn't try to explain or defend myself. I just sat there, letting the silence hold us together. The world outside those walls could have fallen apart, and I don't think I would have noticed. All I knew was the steady rhythm of his presence beside me, the way my heart, though racing, began to find comfort in the idea that maybe I didn't have to keep fighting alone. When he finally pulled his hand back, he didn't step away. He stayed close, his eyes locked on mine, steady and sure. "You don't have to hide from me," he repeated, softer this time, almost like a vow. Something inside me shifted again, deeper this time, like the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. I didn't answer right away, but he didn't need me to. The truth was already there, written in the way I hadn't pulled back, in the way my silence had turned into something closer to acceptance. That night, lying awake, I felt the fear still clinging to me, whispering all the dangers of what it meant to feel this way, of what it meant to let someone see me so fully. But for the first time, hope was louder than fear. I thought about the look in his eyes, the steadiness of his voice, the touch on my shoulder that had told me more than words ever could. And in the quiet of the night, I realized that I was no longer standing on the edge alone. Someone else was there with me, steadying me, waiting patiently for me to take the next step. The day it all came to the surface didn't feel different at first. The morning was ordinary, the sky dull with gray clouds, the kind of weather that makes you expect nothing more than another slow routine. I walked through the halls carrying the same weight I always carried, but something in me had been shifting for days. Every word he had spoken to me, every glance we had shared, had carved a path through the fear I had lived with for so long. It was like standing at the edge of a river, watching the ice melt piece by piece, until the current beneath was too strong to ignore. I knew I couldn't keep holding everything inside. I knew I couldn't keep running. And when practice ended that afternoon, I realized the moment I had been dreading and hoping for was finally here. The locker room was quieter than usual, the storm outside muffling the sounds of the world. Most of the guys had already gone, their laughter fading down the hallway, leaving behind the familiar hum of the lights above and the faint drip of water against tile. I sat on the bench, pretending to tie my shoes like I always did, waiting. And then, like every other time, he stayed. I heard the sound of his bag hitting the floor, the creak of his locker opening, and then the stillness that followed. I didn't look up right away. My chest was tight, my palms damp, my thoughts spiraling faster than I could catch them. But I knew I couldn't leave the room without saying what had been burning inside me for weeks. When I finally raised my head, he was already watching me. Not with curiosity this time, not with questions, but with something steadier, almost like he knew exactly what I was about to say. The sight of it nearly broke me. My throat tightened, my eyes stung, and for a moment I thought I wouldn't be able to form the words. But his gaze didn't waver, and that gave me the strength to try. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice trembling. The confession spilled out of me before I could stop it, raw and unpolished, the truth I had buried for too long. I've been scared for a long time. Scared of what people will think. Scared of what it means. Scared of myself. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. He didn't move closer, he didn't rush me, he just let the words sit in the air between us until I could breathe again. My hand shook as I gripped the edge of the bench, and I forced myself to keep going. "But when I'm around you, it's different. I don't feel like I have to hide. And I don't. I don't want to hide anymore." Saying it out loud felt like tearing open a wound, exposing everything I had fought to keep hidden. My chest ached, my vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might regret it. But then he stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until he was standing right in front of me. He didn't hesitate. He reached down and gently took my hand in his touch warm and steady. "You don't ever have to hide from me," he said softly. His voice carried no judgment, no hesitation, just quiet certainty. The weight of those words broke me in the best way. My shoulders shook as the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over, not from shame but from relief. For so long, I had carried the fear that if anyone truly saw me, they would turn away. But here he was, holding my hand, looking at me like nothing about me needed to be hidden. I let out a shaky breath, squeezing his hand like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. And in a way, it was. For the first time, I felt the fear loosen its grip on me. It didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled me. What replaced it was something softer, something stronger. Hope. We didn't need to say much more after that. The silence that stretched between us wasn't filled with fear anymore, it was filled with possibility. We sat there together, hands entwined, the storm outside fading into a gentle drizzle as though the world itself had exhaled. I realized then that this wasn't about one moment in a locker room, or even about him alone. It was about finally letting myself be seen, about accepting that I didn't have to carry the weight of my truth alone anymore. When we finally stood, gathering our things in the quiet calm that followed, he looked at me with a smile that wasn't just for now but for everything that lay ahead. And for the first time in my life, I walked out of that room without feeling like I was leaving part of myself behind. I walked out lighter, braver, ready to face whatever came next, Not because the fear was gone, but because I wasn't facing it alone anymore.